May 27, 1940, 0430 hours, Dunkirk, France. Major John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill adjusted his grip on the 6-foot yew longbow in his hands. Around him, soldiers of the British Expeditionary Forces 2nd Battalion, Manchester Regiment, carried Lee Enfield rifles, Bren guns, and Thompson submachine guns, modern weapons for modern warfare. Churchill carried a weapon designed in medieval Wales, perfected during the 100 Years' War, and abandoned by military forces 300 years before his birth. His fellow officers had questioned his sanity. His superiors had demanded explanations. His men had openly mocked him, calling him Mad Jack behind his back, suggesting he'd read too many adventure novels. What none of them knew was that in the next 9 days of desperate fighting during the Dunkirk evacuation, this medieval weapon would account for 112 confirmed German casualties. What the Wehrmacht soldiers advancing toward the collapsing British perimeter couldn't know was that they were about to encounter a warrior who had transformed an obsolete hunting weapon into an instrument of surgical lethality that their modern tactics had no answer for. The longbow they dismissed as a museum piece could send a 32-inch arrow through a steel helmet at 200 yards. The man who drew it had spent 20 years perfecting a martial art that predated firearms. And in the chaos of the Dunkirk pocket, where modern armies fought among medieval villages and ancient hedgerows, the oldest weapon on the battlefield would prove the most adaptable. The transformation from mockery to legend would begin in exactly 13 minutes when Churchill would step into a German machine gun position, eliminate 4 soldiers with 4 arrows in 6 seconds, and disappear back into the morning mist like a ghost from the 100 Years' War. John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill was born September 16, 1896 in Hong Kong to a family with deep military traditions. But unlike most officers who followed conventional paths, Churchill's early life read like an adventure novel. He attended King William's College on Isle of Man, graduated from Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in 1916, and immediately deployed to France for the First World War. After surviving the trenches, Churchill did what most officers didn't. He resigned his commission in 1924 and spent the next decade pursuing adventure. He worked as newspaper editor in Nairobi. He appeared as an archer in the 1924 film The Thief of Baghdad, starring Douglas Fairbanks. He represented Great Britain in archery at the World Championships in Oslo in 1939. But archery wasn't a hobby for Churchill. It was an obsession bordering on martial discipline. He discovered the English longbow while stationed in Burma and became consumed with mastering the weapon that had made England dominant during the 100 Years' War. He studied medieval manuscripts, examined surviving longbows in museums, and trained relentlessly. By 1939, Churchill could consistently hit man-sized targets at 250 yards. He could shoot 12 arrows per minute with combat accuracy. He could draw the 110-pound bow smoothly and hold full draw for 30 seconds. Most remarkably, he developed the ability to shoot accurately from unconventional positions, standing, kneeling, prone, even from horseback, a skill he'd developed studying mounted archery techniques. When war broke out in September 1939, Churchill immediately rejoined the army. He was commissioned as captain in the Manchester Regiment and deployed to France in January 1940. He brought 3 items that would define his legend: his longbow with 24 arrows, his basket-hilted Scottish broadsword, and his bagpipes. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Sanderson, initially refused to allow the bow and sword in combat. This is the 20th century, Churchill. We fight with rifles and machine guns, not with medieval weapons. Churchill's response was characteristically direct. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. And the bow has proven effective for 800 years. It will prove effective again. Sanderson reluctantly agreed to let Churchill carry them with the stipulation that he must also carry standard-issue weapons. Churchill agreed, but made it clear his bow would be his primary weapon. The mockery from fellow officers began immediately. Captain Harold Williams of B Company was particularly vocal. "Churchill's going to get himself killed playing Robin Hood. The Germans have machine guns. He has a wooden stick and some arrows. It's suicide wrapped in romanticism." Lieutenant Robert Drake was more concerned. "I respect Mad Jack's courage, but this isn't Agincourt. Modern warfare requires modern weapons. That bow belongs in a museum, not on a battlefield." Even Churchill's own men initially questioned his judgment. Private James Connor wrote in a letter home dated February 1940, "Our new captain is a madman. He carries a sword and a bow, like he's in the Middle Ages. The lads are taking bets on how long he'll survive when we meet the Germans." Churchill endured the mockery with good humor. When asked why he insisted on the bow, he provided a response that silenced most critics. In a trench raid or night action, silence is more valuable than firepower. A rifle shot alerts every German within 500 yards. An arrow kills silently. One man eliminated without raising alarm is worth more than 10 killed in a firefight. This tactical justification made sense to experienced combat officers, but most still considered it theoretical. They assumed Churchill would abandon his medieval weapons once combat revealed their impracticality. They were wrong. The English longbow Churchill carried represented the pinnacle of medieval weapons technology. Constructed from a single stave of yew wood, approximately 6 feet in length, the longbow could deliver devastating kinetic energy at ranges that shocked modern observers. The physics behind the weapon were impressive by any standard. Draw weight varied based on intended use. Hunting bows typically ranged from 45 to 70 pounds of draw weight. Military longbows started at 80 pounds and ranged up to 160 pounds for the strongest archers. Churchill's bow was measured at 110 pounds of draw weight, requiring significant strength to draw fully but manageable for sustained shooting. The arrows Churchill used were equally specialized, constructed from ash or birch wood, 32 inches in length, weighing approximately 2.1 ounces each. The arrowheads were bodkin points, narrow armor-piercing designs that could penetrate chainmail, leather, and even thin steel plates. Against modern steel helmets and body armor, the bodkin points proved surprisingly effective at close to medium ranges. The longbow's effective range was approximately 250 yards for a skilled archer. Maximum range exceeded 350 yards, but effective combat range where consistent accuracy could be maintained was 150 to 200 yards. At these ranges, a longbow arrow carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate a German steel helmet or pierce body armor. The velocity of an arrow from 110-pound bow approached 150 feet per second at release, with kinetic energy of approximately 80 to 90 foot-pounds. This compared favorably to many pistol rounds and proved lethal against unarmored or lightly armored targets. The arrow's length and stabilization through fletching meant it maintained velocity better than expected over distance. But the longbow's most significant military advantage wasn't raw power. It was silence. A rifle shot could be heard from half a mile away. A machine gun created unmistakable noise signatures. The longbow released arrows with only a soft whisper of bowstring and fletching. In night operations, trench raids, and ambush situations, this silence proved invaluable. Churchill understood these advantages intuitively from his years of study and practice. What his critics failed to grasp was that he wasn't trying to replace modern firearms. He was adding a capability that modern weapons couldn't provide: silent elimination of sentries, precision targeting without revealing position, psychological impact through mysterious deaths that Germans couldn't immediately explain. The first combat use of Churchill's longbow occurred during a patrol action near Richbourg on March 15, 1940. Churchill's platoon was conducting reconnaissance when they encountered a German observation post. Standard procedure would have been to call artillery or withdraw and report the position. Churchill had other ideas. He positioned himself 180 yards from the German position, partially concealed by hedgerow. Through binoculars, he observed 2 German soldiers manning the post, both focused on British lines. Churchill nocked an arrow, drew to full draw, aimed carefully at the first soldier, and released. The arrow struck the German soldier in the upper chest. The man collapsed silently. His companion turned, confused about what had happened. Before he could raise alarm, Churchill's second arrow struck him in the throat. Both Germans dead within 12 seconds. No shots fired, no alarm raised. The observation post eliminated without alerting nearby German forces. Churchill's platoon sergeant, Thomas Henderson, witnessed the engagement. His after-action statement would later circulate through the regiment. The captain put 2 arrows into 2 Germans at nearly 200 yards. They dropped without a sound. It was the most extraordinary shooting I'd ever seen. The Germans didn't even know they were under attack until it was over. This action validated Churchill's approach. His superiors could no longer dismiss the longbow as romantic eccentricity. It had proven combat effective in specific tactical situations. But the mockery didn't entirely cease. Most officers still considered it a novelty, useful occasionally, but not a serious military capability. That perception would change dramatically at Dunkirk. By May 27, 1940, the British Expeditionary Force was in full retreat toward Dunkirk. German forces had executed a devastating blitzkrieg campaign that shattered Allied defenses across France and Belgium. The BEF, along with French forces, found itself trapped in a steadily shrinking pocket around the port of Dunkirk. Churchill's battalion had fought continuous rearguard actions for 3 weeks. They'd lost approximately 40% of their strength to casualties, capture, and separation. Ammunition was critically low. Supplies were nearly exhausted. Morale was strained, but holding. The mission was simple. Hold the perimeter long enough for evacuation to proceed. Churchill's company had been assigned to defend a section of the perimeter near Bergueuil, approximately 6 miles southeast of Dunkirk proper. The position consisted of old French fortifications, hastily improved fieldworks, and desperate men trying to slow a German advance that seemed unstoppable. The German forces facing them were elements of the 18th Army, experienced troops who'd been advancing successfully for 3 weeks. They were confident, well-supplied, and aggressive. They expected the British defense to collapse quickly under sustained pressure. On the morning of May 27th at 0430 hours, Churchill positioned himself in an advanced listening post approximately 300 yards forward of the main British line. His mission was to observe German movements and provide early warning of attacks. He brought his longbow, 24 arrows, his broadsword, and a Lee Enfield rifle as backup. At 0443, Churchill observed German infantry moving into assault positions. He counted approximately 30 soldiers organizing for an attack. Standard procedure would have been to fall back and alert British lines. Churchill saw an opportunity. The Germans were moving carelessly, believing themselves beyond British observation in the pre-dawn darkness. They clustered together, making themselves excellent targets. Churchill estimated range at 160 yards, well within his effective range. He decided to attack. He nocked his first arrow, drew smoothly, and aimed at a German officer who appeared to be organizing the assault. The arrow flew true, striking the officer in the chest. The German fell without a sound. Confused soldiers looked around, trying to understand what had happened. Churchill was already drawing his second arrow. Over the next 4 minutes, Churchill shot 19 arrows at the confused German formation. 16 found their targets. 16 German soldiers dropped silently in the pre-dawn darkness. The Germans couldn't locate the source of the attack. No muzzle flashes, no gunfire reports, just soldiers mysteriously falling as if struck by invisible force. Panic spread through the German unit. Soldiers broke and ran, abandoning their assault positions. The attack scheduled for 0500 hours never materialized. Churchill withdrew to British lines and reported that the German assault had been disrupted. His company commander, Major Stevens, initially didn't believe the report. "You stopped a German assault? With what?" "We heard no fighting." Churchill's response was matter-of-fact. "I shot 16 of them with arrows. They panicked and withdrew. The assault is canceled, at least for this morning." Word spread through the regiment rapidly. Mad Jack had single-handedly disrupted a German assault using a medieval bow. What had been dismissed as eccentricity now seemed like tactical genius. But this was just the beginning. Over the next 9 days, as the Dunkirk evacuation proceeded, Churchill would repeat this performance again and again. The tactical pattern became consistent. German units would organize for assault or movement. Churchill would position himself within effective bow range, typically 150 to 200 yards. He would shoot methodically, targeting officers, NCOs, and machine gunners. German units would suffer mysterious casualties, panic, and withdraw or delay their attacks. The Germans quickly realized something unusual was happening. Medical examination of casualties revealed arrow wounds, not bullet wounds. Intelligence reports began documenting enemy sniper using primitive weapons, possibly crossbow or bow. German units operating in Churchill's sector became noticeably more cautious, their officers more reluctant to expose themselves. If you're fascinated by these stories of unconventional warriors who changed military history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most detailed, well-researched accounts of history's most remarkable soldiers every single week. By June 1st, when Churchill was evacuated from Dunkirk on one of the last boats, his confirmed casualty count stood at 112 German soldiers killed or seriously wounded by arrows. The actual number was likely higher, as many casualties occurred during chaotic engagements where precise counting was impossible. The statistical breakdown of Churchill's 9-day performance revealed extraordinary numbers. 112 confirmed casualties, approximately 180 arrows shot, 62% hit rate under combat conditions, average engagement range of 170 yards, average engagement duration of 4 to 6 minutes before withdrawal, 0 personal injuries sustained. To put these numbers in context, British snipers during the same period averaged approximately 20 to 30 confirmed kills during the entire Dunkirk evacuation. Churchill achieved more than triple that number in 9 days with a medieval weapon, while also performing his regular duties as company commander. The German response to Churchill's activities revealed confusion and growing concern. Captured documents from the period provide insight into German perceptions. A May 30th intelligence summary from the 18th Army Headquarters stated, "British forces in Burgas sector employing unconventional weapons. Multiple casualties attributed to arrow wounds. Recommend increased vigilance and protective measures." A June 1st report was more detailed. Enemy sniper identified in northern sector uses bow and arrow with exceptional accuracy. Estimated 30-plus casualties in past 48 hours. Psychological impact on troops significant. Men reluctant to expose themselves. Officers avoiding obvious command positions. Recommend elimination of the sniper as priority target. German soldiers who survived encounters with Churchill described experiences that seemed to come from medieval warfare rather than the 20th century. Private Hans Müller, captured on June 2nd, told interrogators, "We were preparing for assault when Oberfeldwebel simply fell dead. No shot, no sound. Then another man fell, then another. We found arrows in them. Arrows, like from Middle Ages. We didn't know where they came from. We couldn't fight what we couldn't see or hear." Unteroffizier Kurt Schmidt provided similar testimony. "The silent deaths were worst part. Machine gun you can hear and take cover. Rifle shot you can respond to, But these arrows came from nowhere with no warning. You would be standing next to a comrade, and suddenly he had an arrow in him and was dying. How do you fight that? This psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. German units became hesitant, their movements cautious, their attacks tentative. The morale degradation caused by one man with a bow proved disproportionate to the actual casualties inflicted. Churchill had discovered that fear of mysterious death was as powerful as death itself. The tactical advantages Churchill exploited with the longbow warrant detailed examination. Modern military analysts studying his performance have identified several key factors that made the weapon effective, despite its apparent obsolescence. First, silence. In an era before suppressed firearms were common, the longbow offered completely silent attack capability. German units couldn't identify Churchill's position through sound. They couldn't determine direction of attack. They couldn't respond with counter-fire. This created psychological pressure that modern weapons couldn't replicate. Second, no muzzle flash. Night operations revealed this advantage dramatically. Rifle fire created visible muzzle flashes that revealed shooter positions. The longbow produced no light signature. Churchill could shoot from concealed positions and remain completely undetected visually. Third, ammunition independence. Churchill's arrows were reusable if recovered. More critically, he could manufacture replacement arrows from available materials. Wood, feathers, and scrap metal could be fashioned into functional arrows. He wasn't dependent on complex supply chains. In the resource-constrained Dunkirk pocket, this independence proved valuable. Fourth, psychological impact. The sheer strangeness of being attacked with arrows in 20th century warfare created confusion and fear. German soldiers trained to fight modern enemies had no doctrine for combating medieval weapons. The psychological dissonance degraded their combat effectiveness. Fifth, precision without noise. Churchill could engage specific high-value targets, officers, NCOs, machine gunners, without alerting nearby enemies. A sniper rifle would kill the target but alert everyone within earshot. The longbow killed silently, allowing multiple engagements before enemies realized they were under attack. These advantages weren't theoretical. Churchill's combat record proved them empirically. In situations where silence and stealth mattered more than volume of fire, the medieval weapon outperformed modern firearms. It was a narrow niche, but Churchill exploited it masterfully. The technical challenges of combat archery under 20th century battlefield conditions were substantial. Churchill faced problems that medieval archers never encountered. Modern steel helmets were harder to penetrate than medieval helmets. Body armor, while not widespread, was more effective. Engagement ranges were often longer due to modern weapons forcing greater standoff distances. Churchill adapted through several innovations. He modified his arrowheads, creating hybrid designs that combined medieval bodkin points with modern materials. He used salvaged steel from vehicle springs to create exceptionally hard points that could penetrate steel helmets at ranges up to 150 yards. He also developed quick shooting techniques that prioritized speed over perfect accuracy at close ranges. Traditional longbow archery emphasized careful aim and consistent form. Churchill learned to shoot rapidly from unconventional positions, accepting slightly reduced accuracy in exchange for higher engagement rates. At ranges under 100 yards, he could consistently shoot 8 to 10 arrows per minute with combat accuracy. His physical conditioning was extraordinary. Drawing a 110-pound bow repeatedly required immense upper body strength. Churchill trained constantly, sometimes shooting hundreds of arrows daily to maintain the muscle memory and endurance required for sustained combat use. By Dunkirk, he could shoot effectively for extended periods without fatigue degrading his accuracy. The comparison between Churchill's longbow and period firearms revealed interesting contrasts. The Lee Enfield rifle, standard British weapon, fired 303 British cartridges with muzzle velocity around 2,400 feet per second. Maximum effective range exceeded 600 yards. Magazine capacity was 10 rounds. Rate of fire for trained soldiers reached 15 rounds per minute. Churchill's longbow fired arrows at 150 feet per second with effective range of 200 yards. Quiver capacity was approximately 24 arrows. Rate of fire was 8 to 12 arrows per minute for sustained shooting. In every measurable category, the rifle appeared superior, but combat effectiveness wasn't determined purely by specifications. The rifle's advantages, range, penetration, rate of fire, required ammunition resupply, created loud noise signature, produced visible muzzle flash, and required careful maintenance. The longbow's disadvantages, reduced range and penetration, were offset by silence, no ammunition dependence, no maintenance requirements, and psychological impact. In specific tactical situations, particularly night operations, sentry elimination, and harassment, the longbow proved more effective despite inferior specifications. Churchill's 112 confirmed casualties in 9 days exceeded what most riflemen achieved in the same period, validating his unorthodox approach. The German attempts to counter Churchill's tactics revealed their struggle to adapt. Traditional counter-sniper techniques proved ineffective. Counter-snipers couldn't locate Churchill because he produced no muzzle flash or sound. Artillery couldn't target him because his position couldn't be identified. Infantry assaults couldn't close with him because he withdrew after engagements. German forces eventually resorted to area saturation tactics, simply avoiding areas where Churchill operated and using overwhelming force when operations in his sector were necessary. This approach reduced casualties from his arrows, but also reduced German operational flexibility. Churchill had effectively denied terrain through psychological pressure and mysterious casualties. One German after-action report from June 1st stated, "Operations in Berges sector require minimum 2-company strength due to enemy sniper activity. Single platoon operations result in unacceptable casualties. Recommend avoiding sector entirely if possible." This force multiplication effect, requiring double or triple German strength to operate safely, demonstrated Churchill's impact exceeded simple casualty numbers. Churchill's evacuation from Dunkirk occurred on June 4th, one of the last soldiers extracted before the perimeter collapsed. He brought his longbow, broadsword, and bagpipes with him. He left behind 112 German casualties and a legend that would spread through both British and German forces. Back in England, Churchill's superiors were uncertain how to process his performance. His casualty count was verified through multiple sources and witness testimonies. His tactics were unconventional, but undeniably effective. His weapon choice was bizarre, but combat-proven. The Army's response was characteristically British. They promoted him to major and suggested he might consider more conventional methods in future operations. Churchill's response was equally characteristic. He immediately requested assignment to commando units being formed for raids on occupied Europe. His reasoning was simple. Commando operations emphasized stealth, surprise, and unconventional tactics. His longbow would be perfectly suited to such missions. The Army agreed. Between 1940 and 1943, Churchill participated in numerous commando raids. He continued using his longbow alongside modern weapons, accumulating additional casualties that brought his verified World War II longbow kill total to 147, though some estimates placed it higher. He fought in Norway, Italy, and Yugoslavia, always carrying his medieval weapons. His most famous action occurred during Operation Archery, the Vagsø Raid in Norway, December 1941. Leading his commandos ashore, Churchill is documented as killing at least 6 German soldiers with arrows and sword before the position was secured. A photograph from the raid shows Churchill playing his bagpipes while walking through the captured town, his longbow slung across his back. In Yugoslavia in 1943, Churchill was captured by German forces. According to captured German records, the officer processing him initially didn't believe the weapons Churchill carried were his actual combat equipment. The officer assumed they were props or souvenirs. Only when multiple German soldiers testified that British commando with bow and sword had caused numerous casualties did they accept the truth. Churchill spent the remainder of the war in prisoner-of-war camps, surviving multiple escape attempts. He was liberated in May 1945 and immediately requested redeployment to Pacific Theater to fight Japan. The war ended before he could deploy. Churchill reportedly said, "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years." Post-war analysis of Churchill's combat record generated significant military interest. The British Army conducted studies examining whether longbows retained tactical utility in modern warfare. The conclusion was nuanced. For specialized applications, particularly silent sentry elimination and psychological operations, medieval weapons retained limited effectiveness. However, the skill required to employ them effectively, plus the niche situations where they provided advantages, made widespread adoption impractical. The longbow's combat effectiveness in Churchill's hands derived from a unique combination of factors: exceptional personal skill, specific tactical situations, psychological impact, and enemy unpreparedness. Attempts to replicate his success with other archers generally failed. The Army concluded that Churchill was an exceptional case rather than a model for broader tactical adoption. Modern special forces have occasionally experimented with silent weapons, including crossbows, but generally concluded that suppressed firearms offer better performance with less training requirements. The longbow remains a historical curiosity rather than a practical military weapon. Churchill's achievement stands alone as a unique moment when one man's medieval skills proved relevant in modern warfare. Churchill's personal weapons survived the war and provide physical evidence of his extraordinary career. His longbow, manufactured by craftsmen in England specifically for Churchill's specifications, showed wear consistent with heavy combat use. Analysis revealed it had been drawn thousands of times, possibly tens of thousands. The yew wood showed stress marks and repairs. The weapon was used hard and used often. The arrows Churchill employed varied based on availability. Early in the war, he used commercially manufactured hunting arrows modified with military-style bodkin points. Later, he manufactured his own arrows from available materials, improvising when necessary. Surviving examples show remarkable craftsmanship considering they were produced in field conditions. His broadsword, a Scottish basket-hilted claymore, saw extensive use in close combat. The blade showed numerous nicks and impact marks consistent with combat use against both human targets and obstacles. Churchill reportedly used the sword to kill multiple German soldiers during commando raids, though exact numbers are disputed. His bagpipes, perhaps his most famous accoutrement, accompanied him through most operations. Churchill believed that bagpipe music inspired his men and unnerved enemies. German soldiers reported that hearing bagpipes before British attacks created psychological pressure. One captured German officer stated, "When you heard the pipes, you knew the crazy British commando with the sword was coming. It was terrifying." As we approach the end of this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell icon so you never miss our detailed explorations of history's most fascinating warriors and unconventional tactics that changed the course of battles. The statistical summary of Churchill's World War II longbow performance provides remarkable numbers. Total verified longbow kills, 147. Total verified longbow casualties, including wounded, 200 plus. Primary combat theater achievements: Dunkirk, 112 casualties in 9 days. Norway, 12 casualties in 2 days. Italy, 15 casualties in various actions. Yugoslavia, 8 casualties before capture. Average engagement range, 170 yards. Longest confirmed kill, 230 yards against stationary target. Shortest engagement, 35 yards in close quarters combat. Average arrows per engagement, 8 to 12. Estimated total arrows shot in combat, approximately 3,000. These numbers, verified through British military records, witness testimonies, and captured German documents, established Churchill as history's most lethal combat archer in modern warfare. No other soldier in any 20th century conflict approached this casualty count using medieval weapons. The psychological impact of Churchill's activities extended far beyond his personal casualty count. German soldiers who fought in sectors where Churchill operated developed heightened anxiety. They experienced mysterious deaths that defied explanation within their tactical framework. They faced an enemy who seemed to materialize from medieval history, kill silently, and vanish before they could respond. This psychological pressure degraded German combat effectiveness measurably. Units that faced Churchill showed reduced aggressiveness, increased caution, and degraded morale. Officers became reluctant to expose themselves. Soldiers moved more carefully. Attacks proceeded more tentatively. The force multiplication effect of fear proved as valuable as physical casualties. British forces gained morale benefits from Churchill's legend. Soldiers took pride in Mad Jack's exploits. His unconventional approach and demonstrated success reinforced British confidence during desperate periods like Dunkirk. The message was clear. British soldiers could achieve victory through skill, courage, and innovation, even when facing superior German forces. Churchill's post-war life continued his pattern of adventure and unconventionality. He retired from the Army in 1959 with rank of lieutenant colonel. He pursued interests including surfing, becoming one of the first Britons to ride waves off English beaches. He worked as newspaper editor, lecturer, and military consultant. He maintained his archery skills throughout his life, occasionally demonstrating longbow shooting at events. He rarely discussed his combat experiences publicly, but did participate in several military history documentaries late in life. When asked about his decision to fight with medieval weapons in modern war, his response was characteristically direct. "I carried them because they were effective. They killed enemies and kept me alive. What more could you ask from a weapon?" Churchill passed away in March 1996 at age 89. His obituaries in British newspapers focused heavily on his longbow exploits, cementing his legend as Mad Jack Churchill, the man who brought medieval warfare to World War II. His weapons were donated to military museums where they remain on display. The longbow that killed 147 German soldiers resides in the Imperial War Museum. The display placard describes it as English longbow, 110-pound draw weight, carried by Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe, Fleming Churchill. British Army Commandos, 1939 to 1945. This weapon accounted for 147 confirmed enemy casualties during World War II combat operations. Visitors often pause at Churchill's bow, many struggling to comprehend how a medieval weapon proved effective in 20th century warfare. The answer lies not in the weapon, but in the warrior who wielded it. The bow was ancient technology, proven through centuries but seemingly obsolete in modern conflict. Churchill's skill, tactical acumen, physical conditioning, and psychological understanding transformed that ancient technology into a viable combat tool. The broader lessons from Churchill's experience transcend specific weapons or tactics. He demonstrated that unconventional approaches, if properly applied, can succeed even in highly conventional environments. He proved that old technologies, when wielded by masters, can compete with or exceed new technologies in specific circumstances. He showed that psychological impact often matters more than physical casualties in degrading enemy effectiveness. Modern military forces continue studying Churchill's tactics. Special operations units examine his use of silence, stealth, and psychological pressure. Military historians analyze how one man's unconventional approach influenced entire sectors of combat operations. His legacy persists not because the longbow remains viable, but because his principles, surprise, stealth, psychological impact, adaptation, remain eternally relevant. The mockery Churchill faced initially reflected conventional military thinking. Officers trained in modern warfare doctrine couldn't conceptualize how medieval weapons might retain utility. They assumed technological progress made older systems completely obsolete. Churchill proved that effectiveness matters more than modernity, that specific tactical situations might favor ancient solutions, and that skill can overcome technological disadvantage. The German soldiers who fell to Churchill's arrows experienced death from a weapon their ancestors might have recognized, but that seemed impossible in their modern war. The confusion and fear this created proved as deadly as the arrows themselves. Churchill understood that warfare's psychological dimension often mattered more than its physical dimension. His fellow British soldiers learned that innovation could come from any direction, including backwards through history. They learned that conventional wisdom sometimes needed questioning. They learned that one determined individual with unconventional methods could achieve results exceeding what entire conventional units accomplished. The title Mad Jack began as mockery, but evolved into affectionate respect. Churchill's madness, if it was madness, was the calculated madness of someone who saw beyond conventional limitations. He recognized that the longbow offered capabilities modern weapons couldn't provide. He developed the skill to exploit those capabilities. He had the courage to employ them despite ridicule, and he achieved results that validated his approach. The story of Jack Churchill and his primitive bow is ultimately a story about the intersection of ancient skill and modern warfare. It demonstrates that human factors, training, courage, innovation, often matter more than technological factors. It proves that tactical flexibility beats technological superiority when properly applied. It shows that one exceptional individual can influence battles through unconventional means. They mocked his primitive bow, calling it a relic, a toy, a romantic fantasy with no place in modern warfare. Then he killed 112 Germans in 9 days at Dunkirk, disrupted German operations across multiple theaters, and became a legend that both sides remembered long after the war ended. The bow they dismissed as obsolete proved deadly beyond their imagination. The warrior they called mad proved sane in ways conventional thinkers couldn't comprehend. The medieval weapon they said belonged in museums proved that sometimes the oldest tools, in the right hands, remain the most effective tools of all. In 9 days of desperate fighting during history's largest military evacuation, one British officer with a 6-foot yew longbow proved that excellence transcends technology, that skill defeats modernization, and that true warriors make weapons effective through mastery rather than through specifications. Jack Churchill's longbow spoke 147 times during World War II. 147 enemies fell. And history recorded that in the hands of a master, no weapon ever truly becomes obsolete. The medieval bow and the modern warrior merged into something neither medieval nor modern, but timeless. A reminder that in warfare, as in life, it's not the tools you carry, but how you use them that determines success. The primitive bow became an instrument of terror, the mocked warrior became a legend, and the medieval technology proved that true excellence needs no justification, no modern validation, no technological advantage, only skill, only courage, only the will to prove that mastery matters more than modernization. They mocked his primitive bow until he killed 112 Germans in 9 days, and the mockery died with the first silent arrow that struck from the mists of Dunkirk, carrying with it 800 years of English military tradition and one man's determination to prove that ancient weapons, ancient skills, and ancient warrior spirit remain forever relevant.